July 2025, Ukrainian soldiers found Chinese-made engines in captured Russian drones. The crazy part, they were labeled as refrigeration units to avoid the sanctions on Russia. When China was accused of supporting Russia's war machine, they just claimed that they were unaware. 6 months earlier, 1,000 tons of missile fuel chemicals carried on 2 Iranian cargo ships left Chinese ports, enough to power 260 rockets aimed at Israel. China again denied involvement, but the evidence keeps mounting. These appear to be part of a deliberate system, methods where China allegedly fuels conflicts in secret while preaching peace in public. And the bigger question isn't how, it's why. The story starts with the FBI's most wanted list. Surprising, right? Between the terrorists and drug lords, there's this random Chinese businessman with a $5 million bounty on his head. Li Fangwei, otherwise known as Karl Lee. During the Iran-Israel war in June 2025, the Iranian missiles used contain critical parts that can be traced back to Lee's network. For more than 15 years, Lee has run at least 20 fake paper companies. They move things like graphite used for missile guidance systems, gyroscopes for the tracking of targets, and alloys for the actual missile casings. The US has been trying to shut down Lee's operations since 2006. They have sanctioned his companies and have even directly reached out to the Chinese government to help arrest him. But all the Chinese government said was that they will look into it. No prosecutions or arrests were reported. When accused by reporters of protecting this criminal, China's foreign minister called the allegations baseless. Meanwhile, Lee's operations continued. In the northern Chinese city of Dalian, a factory produces mountains of graphite. The product moves through a complex web of shell companies, complete with fake addresses and employees. One company buys the materials, labeling them as industrial graphite for metallurgical purposes, while another handles shipping via fake documents with final destinations like Dubai or Malaysia, never Iran directly. A third launders the money through international banks. Throughout the whole process, a fourth company coordinates with the Iranian buyers. Whenever one company was flagged by banks and blacklisted, Lee simply created another one. He has a whole bunch of henchmen helping him. In 2023, the US indicted several of them for supplying Iran's missile program. But just like Lee, they are walking freely in China, raising a really important question. Was Lee operating by himself? Or is this something more systematic? Journalists found the answer when they spoke to Lee's brother. He revealed that many other Chinese companies were doing business with Iran. This wasn't just one company, it was an entire industry. From Chinese factories, the materials traveled through international ports, changing hands and documentation multiple times and then finally arriving at Iranian missile factories. The same factories that produce the missiles fired at Israel and also provide the weapons that flow to terrorist groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. This whole time, Lee has operated openly in China. The factory of one of the world's most wanted men didn't even have security. Journalists without permission could just walk in and take photos of the graphite just lying there. Christopher Ford, Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation under Trump's first administration, said the following: "The real problem is Lee's network. This consists of well-established companies and long-standing relationships that evidently enjoy the protection or at least the permission of the Chinese government to do what they do. Meanwhile, Iran has become China's most reliable oil supplier, selling 90% of it to Beijing at steep discounts. In return, Iran gets what it needs to build missiles capable of reaching its enemies, who also happen to be American allies. But even more importantly, a stronger Iran makes the Middle East more unstable. This diverts American attention away from Asia, China's backyard. The key here though is plausible deniability. It is like hiring someone else to do your dirty work so that you can claim your hands are clean. Hypothetically, the government can just say, hey, That's just a private person who's breaking the law. We don't know what's going on here, and no one can prove otherwise. This shields the government from diplomatic consequences like sanctions if they were caught openly arming sanctioned countries like Iran. Quite ironically, China maintains trade relationships with both Iran and Israel at the same time. Shadow brokers like Karl Lee allegedly doing Beijing's bidding, as explained in the book The Chinese Phantom, The Hunt for the World's Most Dangerous Arm Dealer. Great book, by the way. Check it out. Links in the description. But this is just the first approach in China's playbook. For the second, we have to go to another enemy of the US, but this time on China's border. North Korea. In the Chinese city of Tantong, where the Yalu River separates China from North Korea, a businesswoman named Ma Xiaohong built what appeared to be a thriving trading company. This wasn't some shadowy network of fake companies like Karl Lee's. Tantong Hongxiang Industrial Development was a legitimate business empire. It had proper officers, hundreds of employees, and all the required registrations. For over 20 years, it openly traded coal, machinery, and steel across the border. But in September 2016, the US Department of Justice dropped a bombshell. Ma and the company were indicted of evading sanctions and money laundering in support of North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Apparently, North Korea's state-owned bank, the Korea Kwangson Banking Corporation, was sanctioned for funding weapons development. So they were cut off from the global financial system. Ma's company then created a secret banking connections to help them move money around the world. But she wasn't the only one. Through many channels like hers, the UN estimated that hundreds of millions or even billions have flowed directly into North Korea's nuclear missile programs. When confronted with this evidence by the US, China's actions spoke louder than words. While they announced an investigation into serious economic crimes, there is no public information that I can find that Ma was arrested and put into prison. But there are reports from South Korean media in 2024 that she and her company are back in action trading with North Korea. Regardless, the damage has already been done. North Korea now possesses nuclear weapons and missile systems supposedly capable of hitting America directly. Oh, and the massive trucks that carry these missiles through Pyongyang's military parades, they're modified Chinese vehicles. Well, the funding that made their nuclear program possible, it flowed through Chinese front companies like Mars. The outcome, North Korea is now a nuclear-armed buffer state that counteracts US influence in South Korea. This is another masterclass in plausible deniability. On one hand, they publicly support denuclearization efforts. On the other, China now has a strategic advantage in the Korean peninsula. But in the background of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, the Chinese are exploiting an entirely different loophole. Before I reveal that, if you're enjoying this video so far, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel where I cover more stories like this about the hidden forces shaping Asia today. As I said at the beginning, Ukrainian soldiers have found Chinese-made engines within Russia's long-range kamikaze drones, known as the Gapiya-3. More importantly, these engines have been labeled as refrigeration units in shipping documents to bypass sanctions. But this wasn't an isolated case. The EU reported that 80% of goods getting into Russia, despite all the bans, are smuggled through China. These include microchips and electronics found in missiles and drones. Even more shocking, Reuters reported in August 2025 that a Russian explosives factory had bought industrial control equipment through Chinese sellers. Think of this as automated systems that control factory production lines. In this case, for making explosives used in Russia's artillery shells and bombs. Well, the loophole the Chinese exploited in all of these cases is called dual-use technology. These items smuggled into Russia can be used for peaceful civilian purposes as well as for military applications. Those drone engines, they can be for drones capturing aerial photography shots, or for those ramming bombs at Ukrainian soldiers. The microchips for missiles could easily be for regular computers. Industrial machines can be used in a factory making cereals or an explosives plant. Dual-use technology means that Chinese sellers have the perfect plausible deniability. If accused, they could simply say, "We are just selling civilian goods. We can't control what Russia does with them after buying." What makes this approach even more effective is China's status as the world's manufacturing hub. They make most of the world's electronics and components, which gives them huge control over who gets access to technology during conflicts. At the start of the war, Chinese companies sold to both Russia and Ukraine. But when the Western sanctions kicked in, something strange happened. Exports were being blocked, but it seems that it's only to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia kept getting components through various secret channels. Ukrainian President Zelensky has accused China of this double standard. Chinese Mavic drones is open for Russians, but is closed for Ukrainians. There are production lines on Russian territory where there are Chinese representatives. But of course, these allegations can't be directly proven. The Chinese government, as usual, denies in public that they are helping Russia. At the same time, by allegedly supplying Russia with critical components, the conflict goes on, which has several benefits for China. First, Russia is now more dependent on China than ever. With Western countries refusing to trade with them, Russia has to buy almost everything from China, from cars to computer chips. In 2023, trade between the two hit a record $240 billion. In exchange, China gets super cheap oil from Russia, but $15 to $30 less per barrel than normal prices. Second, the war drains Western military resources. The US has sent over 2 million artillery shells and committed more than $180 billion in aid to Ukraine since 2022. Every missile sent to Ukraine means one less deployed to the Pacific in the case of any conflict there, with China. Third, this is like a practice run for China. They're watching how their companies can move goods through places like Hong Kong, Turkey, and Kazakhstan to bypass sanctions on Russia. This means if they ever face similar restrictions, perhaps over Taiwan, they know what works and what doesn't when trying to get around Western sanctions. And finally, because of the plausible deniability, China maintains its image as a neutral party. It can position itself as a peacemaker, while the US, that's supporting Ukraine openly and directly, gets portrayed as a warmonger. This whole situation in the Russia-Ukraine war shows how China can make use of their strong manufacturing base to influence the conflict. But right on their doorstep in Myanmar, China takes things even further. In 2021, Myanmar's military overthrew the democratically elected government, plunging the country into civil war. The country is effectively split between different armed groups. The military government, known as a junta, holding major cities, then there are ethnic armed organizations controlling their regions, and various militia groups fighting throughout the country. Unlike in Iran, North Korea, and Russia, there are no shadow companies, front businesses, or dual-use loopholes. Instead, Chinese state-owned companies began building bomb factories in Myanmar. According to UN reports, China has supplied over $1 billion in direct weapons sales to Myanmar's military junta. These aren't even dual-use items or components they are put into weapons. These are the actual bombs that the military are using in airstrikes to drop on schools and hospitals. The Special Advisory Council for Myanmar found that the Chinese state-owned enterprise, China South Industries Group Corporation, provided designs, engineers, and components for manufacturing bombs. The human cost of Myanmar's civil war has been devastating. Tens of thousands of deaths and over 3.5 million people displaced. When the UN confronted China with evidence of these weapons sales, China didn't even deny them like in earlier cases. Instead, its foreign ministry dismissed the reports as smears against China, insisting that the sales were simply normal arms trade between sovereign states. But what makes Myanmar different is that China isn't just backing the military dictatorship. According to journalist Bertil Lintner and many other outlets, Chinese weapons have found their way to the other side of the war. Various ethnic armed groups have received surface-to-air missiles, armored vehicles, drones, rifles, and mines smuggled across China's Yunnan border with Myanmar. Why is there this weird contradiction? Well, because what matters to China in Myanmar isn't really who wins the war. It's protecting their strategic interests in the country. Myanmar has a really important oil and gas pipeline built by China that runs from Myanmar's coast to China's Yunnan province. This gives China a way to import oil that doesn't have to go through the Malacca Strait, which is this narrow choke point that could be easily blocked by the US in case there is an open conflict like over Taiwan. Myanmar also happens to be rich in rare earth minerals essential for China's tech industry. China is hedging its bets. No matter who wins, China wins. And the ones who suffer are the people of Myanmar. So I'm curious what you think about China's actions across the world, direct or indirect. What does it say about the future of these wars? Let me know in the comments. In my opinion, in this aspect, perhaps China isn't so different from other major powers. There's a saying about the Ukraine war that the US is willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. And we can't forget that it has certainly played a very huge role in fanning the flames of war in their region. And then in Gaza, the US continues to support Israel with weapons and money despite the mounting civilian deaths and humanitarian disaster. The sad reality is that the world of geopolitics is cold and harsh. Human lives, especially those in other countries, are just like pawns on a chessboard, collateral damage in the pursuit of national interests. Thanks for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more. Peace.